You are listening to Hit Play, Not Pause, a feisty menopause podcast for active, performance-minded women. I am your host, Celine Yeager. Each week, I bring you advice from athletes, scientists, researchers, and other experts to help you feel and perform your best no matter what your hormones are doing. This show is a production of Feisty Media. Hello, strong, feisty women. I hope you all are well. So we have a real treat for you this week. We not only have one guest, performance physical therapist, Dr. Casey Francis, but also our resident favorite menopause specialist, Dr. Carla DiGirolamo. You see, back in December, Carla wrote a blog on her athletic aging Substack titled Performance Physical Therapy, an Investment in Your Longevity, which of course I will drop in the show notes so you can check that out for yourself. And it was all about how Carla was dealing with some injuries that she could not shake. And she was starting down the doom spiral of, is this the beginning of the end? Does this mean I can't play tennis or do CrossFit anymore? Is this forever? You know, the disaster casting that we can all be so good at. Then she found performance physical therapist, Dr. Casey Francis, founder of Movement Method, who specializes in root cause-driven care for active individuals and athletes. And her approach integrates movement analysis, progressive strength, regenerative therapies to help heal from injury, build back resilience, and just sustain high-level performance, which as an elite level swimmer herself, Casey totally understands. Well, within 2 months of seeing Casey, Carla's nagging forearm injury was resolved. Totally gone. And when she told me that, I reached out and I was like, I have to have Casey on the show to hear all about her practice and the assessments and the techniques she practices. And we had a great conversation. And when we were done, I thought, I should give Carla a call and get the story from her side to bring it all home. And that's exactly what I did. And I think it all just illustrates what so many of us know and experience, that as our hormone levels fluctuate and decline during the menopause transition, we can find ourselves wrestling with new niggles and injuries and aches and pains like frozen shoulder and tennis elbow and Achilles tendinopathy and just other musculoskeletal setbacks. It's also a time of life when stress can be high and sleep is hard to come by and old injuries rear their heads and aging comes into play. So you get the picture, but it does not have to be the end of the line on your active life. So this week we talk all about all of it, the movement assessments, the prehab, the rehab, the healing modalities, and what you need to know to stay active for the long haul. One quick clarification note, Carla talks about how she swears by crossover symmetry to keep her shoulders especially healthy and strong. And that is a structured resistance band training system designed to improve shoulder health and strength and mobility, often used in prehab and rehab and athletic performance. I'll link that in the show notes as well so you can check it out. I really enjoyed this one and I hope you do too. Before we get to it, as always, give us a follow at Feisty Menopause on Instagram and Facebook. Come in and join our private Hit Play Not Pause Facebook group to keep the conversation going. Head into those show notes and sign up for my free weekly Feisty 40 Plus newsletter with all the training and nutrition news you can use. And thank you, as always, for the kind ratings and reviews on Apple and other podcast platforms. They keep coming in, and it really does help the show. Also, if you like the show, please be sure to follow it on your podcast platform and share it with a friend, because that really helps too. Very finally, quick thanks to Wahoo for their support. Listeners to this show can use the code FEISTY2026, that's all caps Feisty, F-E-I-S-T-Y 2026, to get a free Headwind Smart Fan valued at $300 with the purchase of their truly revolutionary treadmill, the Wahoo Kicker Run. Just click on that link in the show notes and check it out. Thank you, Wahoo, for your support. And with that, enough of me. Let's have a few words about those awesome sponsors and get on with the show. All right, Casey, welcome to Hit Play Not Pause.
Thank you. I'm so excited to be here.
Yeah, I'm really our resident menopause specialist that I've had on the show many, many times, Dr. Carla DiGirolamo, recommended you and said you should really talk to this woman and just couldn't speak highly enough about the work you had done for her. And I'll tell you, we have so many, as you know, people in this demographic dealing with recurrent injuries, new injuries, injury after injury. that it just seemed like a conversation we should 100% be having. So I
Well,
appreciate it.
absolutely. And I think that, so I'm a physical therapist, and I think that it's something that's not really necessarily taught in PT school for us to necessarily look at. It's just something like a trend that I've been seeing. So I kind of do my own research and my own deep dive into it. And I can kind of pinpoint when I'm like, okay, this and this kind of seem to maybe be pointing towards more of this. Like, have you had your hormones checked? And otherwise, I'm just continuing to treat the symptoms and not the root cause.
So you are a performance physical therapist, and what does that actually mean?
So, performance physical therapy, I feel like we kind of bridge the gap between strength training and conditioning and traditional physical therapy. So, rather than sometimes in the traditional insurance route, you're forced to only look at one body part at a time, and they're more focused on getting you better right then and there. But unfortunately, you can't always continue to keep working on what caused it in the first place. And unless you're good about keeping up with your exercises, which a lot of people might not be, it tends to
Totally.
come back. So performance PT kind of looks more in the lines of like how someone moves, why they're moving the way they're moving, and addressing the body as a whole. So not just one body part. We're focusing on whole body movement. We're focusing on load tolerance. So making sure we're building up proper load for muscles, ligaments, tendons, joints. We're looking at strength, mobility, resilience, and then being able to return to like real life and sport. And often, people come with goals, end up sticking around long term, and they actually come more regularly, and then they kind of go past their goals and like, cool, I just reached that goal. What's another goal that I can go do now? So it's really fun in that aspect, and get to incorporate everything like nutrition and sleep. And so it just encompasses a little bit more than the traditional physical therapy route.
Yeah, so what I'm hearing, and correct me if I'm wrong, so I would normally come to see a physical therapist if, obviously, if I have some sort of acute injury, but obviously also if I have like a hamstring issue or something's going on with my Achilles or all of that stuff. And they give you, and absolutely no offense, but they give you those boring exercises that everybody hates to do because they're kind of tedious, and you do them and you feel better and you stop doing them and then it comes back. And that's what you're referring to, right? Without ever really getting to like, why are you having this
Right.
hamstring?
Or sometimes rehab is stopped before the meaningful changes made. So tendons love load. They take a long time to build up resilience. And sometimes like the typical maybe your doctor writes a script for 2 to 3 times a week for 8 weeks. If you look at tissue healing time, it takes longer than 8 weeks for a tendinopathy or some sort of tendon issue to resolve. So oftentimes you are told you can't come back because of insurance, whatever it may be, before the issue is actually finally resolved.
Hmm. So talk about what you typically see, because my understanding when we talked before that you do see a lot of women in my audience, like active midlife perimenopausal women. What brings them through your door?
Yeah, I do see a lot. I see a lot of runners, and a lot of times they have a proximal hamstring issue, whether it be from maybe something that wasn't addressed after childbirth and changing of like the way the hips and the pelvis are after childbirth. I do see a lot of adhesive capsulitis, frozen shoulder, which is very common with the decrease in estrogen. And well, that's, the thought behind it. So I see a lot of that. I do see a lot of Achilles too. I do see some like CrossFit athletes, and I do see a lot of maybe the beginning stages of Achilles tendinopathy. They usually come to see me before it gets like too bad. Tennis elbow, golfer's elbow is usually more like musculotendinous issues is what I tend to see a lot in the perimenopause, menopause. That, and or they're also complaining, I can't sleep. I wake up, I feel foggy brained. I just feel like my workouts I'm doing terrible. I can't do the same thing I used to do anymore. And they feel like their body's breaking down, and they often come sometimes with more than just like one body part hurting.
Where do you start with them?
Honestly, like I asked them, are you doing anything about like, have you had your hormones checked? If not, are you open to doing that? I can refer you to someone that is more specialized in that. I might ask them about their sleep. I usually ask a lot about nutrition. Are you eating enough protein? What kind of supplements are you taking? I do like to dive into that. And then let's say they're coming in with a shoulder pain, let's say they're coming with shoulder pain and knee pain, if I can, I try to trust both in the same session, but I usually, at least the first time, I'm like, okay, which one's hurting more? Let's focus on that one. And then we'll focus on the knee maybe in the next session. And then once we have one session with each body part, then we'll kind of combine the two. But it's hard to sometimes do a thorough evaluation with both. So I want to make sure that I address everything that I can.
So you mentioned getting hormone check, which maybe you may or may not know is a controversial thing in the menopause, perimenopause space. What are you looking for when you talk about that?
I guess it's not, I don't know personally. Like, I do know that sometimes there's the ratios between estrogen and progesterone and testosterone, not necessarily the numbers, because I know the numbers can be very, if you don't know what your numbers were when you were younger, how do you know that your numbers now are low or high? For example, like I've had mine tested and I think my testosterone's like 20, which is pretty low for someone in their 30s. But I maybe in 10 years, 15 years from now, and it was at 20, I would think, oh my gosh, that's super low, not knowing that is actually my norm.
Right.
So I think it's more maybe like the ratio. I don't know. I guess just talking to someone that maybe has a little bit more knowledge in it, just to make sure that they are doing what they're doing and they're on the right path. I had a patient of mine recently talk to a nurse practitioner friend, and all she really needed was magnesium. That was all. And that like helped her so much. It wasn't even like a hormonal. Like she needed maybe a little bit, but the magnesium seemed to be helping more.
It helped musculoskeletally?
And just sleeping better at night and waking up and feeling better. And because of that, she was sleeping better. So she was recovering better. So she was having better workouts, and she was noticing overall less pain because your body goes through its biggest recovery process when you're sleeping in regards to cellular turnover. And if you're not sleeping and getting into that deep REM sleep, which this patient wasn't, the magnesium has now helped. And now she's feeling like 10 times better just by adding magnesium when she's sleeping. So it doesn't always have to be hormones.
Yeah, it's a blood panel just to see like what's going on under the hood is what I'm hearing. Yeah. So let's maybe, Carla gave us the go ahead to talk about her specifically, and I think it sometimes helps to hear like what it looks like. So she was dealing with what it sounds like epicondylitis from the description, like so, and now she says she's pain free and has been working on other areas like hip and shoulder pain. So what did you do with her?
So she had like persistent elbow pain. So we actually did some dry needling. I don't know if you're familiar with dry needling, but we did a little bit.
How is that different from acupuncture?
Great question. It's more, I will say we use the same needles as acupuncture, but acupuncture is more related to like the meridians and energy flow. When I took my dry needling course a couple years ago, we do learn some of the same points, but we do it more from like a physiological aspect, and we're trying to get a cellular change versus more of the energy balance. So it's kind of similar. There's definitely a crossover between the two. I get asked that question a lot, so that's why I kind of like smile. I was just asked that question earlier today. So we did some dry needling, and that just helps create a little bit of micro trauma and some blood flow. And then from there, it was loading. So like I said before, tendons love load. So we did a lot of eccentric loading. And then in addition to addressing the elbow, we also looked at, okay, is she pronating and supinating enough? Does she have enough wrist extension? Is she limited in her shoulder external rotation? Because if you're limited in your shoulder external rotation, you're trying to go into a front squat, you're going to load your elbow a little bit more than if you're not. So in addition to just the elbow, we were also looking at shoulder stuff, which is funny that you bring that up because I just saw her last week and she has some shoulder pain, and and I think something that we realize is just a lot of scapular endurance mechanics that are lacking. And then in an overhead position, she is lacking a little bit of like her final shoulder flexion and external rotation. And so working on that, I think, is going to help make sure that the elbow stuff doesn't come back too.
That's really interesting. So when you say that you're working on that, what does that look like? What kind of, is it specific? I mean, it's probably both. Is it specific exercises that are isolated to that, as well as like whole body exercises, or what are we looking at? And I really am curious about the eccentric
Yes.
loading because whenever I've had epicondylitis just a couple times from single speed mountain biking, and they have the thero bar that you
Yes.
resist,
Yep.
and that thing worked miraculously well. So I'm just really curious, like what it is about the eccentric loading that seems to work so well for those connective tissues.
So eccentric loading, it's loading the muscle while the muscle is lengthening. So you're controlling the lowering phase rather than doing the lifting. So
Mhm.
tendons respond best to slow, controlled load, and it helps to basically stimulate the collagen remodeling. So it helps to improve the tendon's ability to sustain the force again. So that's why a lot of times with tendons, we like to do that. Typically, if someone's super inflamed, you actually have to start more with isometrics just
Mm.
to desensitize the tendon and desensitize like the nerve endings in that region. And then once they can tolerate that, then you go into eccentrics. And eventually you need to work back to concentrics, depending on the muscle and the joint and everything. But eccentrics just tend to do a lot better when it comes to remodeling the tissue and doing that slow controlled into the lengthening. So that's kind of why we do that. And so specifically for her, we were doing a lot of eccentric for wrist flexion. I have to look back at my notes. It was last year, but
Yeah.
I think we were doing a lot of eccentric wrist flexion, specific for her.
And then was she doing one? How does she keep it from coming back? I guess, or does that remodeling help keep it from coming back?
It helps it keep from coming back, and then the dry
Yeah.
needling can help with that remodeling process too. I think now what we're doing and addressing what's going on with her shoulder is also going to prevent it from coming back. I would say for her, I'm only talking about the eccentrics, but with her being as active as she is in CrossFit, and I made a lot of the exercises very specific to points that she was having pain during her exercise. So, for example, we did a lot of like wrist, like radial deviation, which would be like this movement, which affects that kind of epicondylitis region there too, on the
Sort of
lateral
like a
elbow.
side to side.
Yeah, but we did
Yeah.
isometric for that, and we did like long lever, and then I also tried to recreate a lot of things like in a snatch grip or a clean grip because it helps with like the brain connection there to feel safe again to be able to tolerate that. I think that's another thing that's different in the
Mm.
performance PT world is that I trying to really gear everything back towards the person's goals and what they're doing every day. And I think that helps people be more compliant when I give them exercises because it makes sense why they're doing it. Plus, it continues to be related to their goal and what they're trying to get back to. So I forgot to kind of like mention that. But so it wasn't just eccentrics, but yeah.
So are you doing full movement assessments with them as well? I asked that
Yeah.
because in my experience, whenever I've had any niggle, it's never where the niggle is. It's coming from like another, like the knee is coming, left knee coming from right hip. You know what I
You,
mean? Yeah.
yep. So it's just, because we're talking about Carla, I'm going to
Yeah.
continue to use her because so she came last week for shoulder pain and some just feeling like her shoulder was starting to get some pain, wanted to work on some mobility and scap endurance. And I watched her do an overhead squat and I was like, does your other hip or back hurt? And she's like, yeah, but I wasn't going to bring it up this session because I really only wanted to focus on my shoulder. And I was like, well, we need to bring it up because this is also affecting that.
Right.
So yes, I don't know if you're familiar or if you've heard of SFMA, Selective Functional Movement Assessment. It's kind of
It's not Gray Cook, is it? No.
it's a baseline of how to do a quick screen of the whole body just to see where there might be a dysfunction. Then you can like dive deeper into the different body parts. So I use a little bit of the principles from there, but honestly, a lot of times like I have to have the person do exactly what makes it hurt. And then
Right.
I can see like what's happening to their body under that load. And so for example, with Carla, I just watched her do an overhead squat and all of a sudden you just saw like one shoulder collapse and then she was leaning towards one side and side bending towards the other. And I was like, her back must hurt. And I was like, does your back hurt? She's like, yeah, but I don't want to talk about it now. I want to just focus on my shoulder. I was like, no, we're focusing on both, because what came first, the chicken or the egg? Like,
Yep.
it's possible that maybe the low back hip has been lacking some stability for some time. And so now when she does overhead stuff, like an overhead squat, for example, maybe that side from a trunk standpoint, right? If there's a leak in the canister that's not allowing you to have stability, your body's going to find it somewhere else. So
Right.
definitely important to look at the whole body.
And then what did you do with that?
I actually, she's a good example where we did address both in one session, and luckily we had the time, and because I know her and I've worked with her before, it was a little bit easier. But we worked on I think it was right side. I can't remember exactly what side, but for the hip, she was lacking some internal rotation control of her hip. So I gave her some exercises, specifically closed chain, which would be when her foot's on the ground, and working on her body controlling into that internal range of motion. She felt her hip just like fire up with that. So I gave her some things to work on that, and then gave her some scap endurance exercises, and she's going to kind of focus on those things for a little bit, and then we're going to reevaluate essentially. But I tried to just address the impairments. I think something also in PT school, they're like very like diagnose, like give them a, and it's not, you can't always diagnose that. There's no like ICD-10 code for that. It's just, these are your impairments. This is what we're going to do to fix them. These are your goals. And that's your plan of care. That's what we're going to do.
Well, and a lot of women, especially by the time they reach 40 for sure, 50, 100% for sure, they've got to have past injuries, past in all kinds of things that they've learned to compensate for.
Yes.
So, yeah.
And not everyone has to be symmetrical, right? It's I took another course, barbell rehab method. It's another like PT, and they basically are like, you don't have to fix everything. Not everyone's going to look exactly the same way. It doesn't have to be absolutely perfect, but use your intuition. If you feel like that's causing the person's pain, then address it.
Yeah. Let's talk frozen shoulders specifically, because I'm very curious, because it's the only thing that I ever hear that people will say, oh, it can take 3 years. And I'm like, what? What are you talking about? Like, is it that intractable? What do we know? What don't we know? How do you deal with it? You must see it all the time.
I do see it a lot. And okay, so sometimes it can come insidiously. Sometimes it can like pop out of nowhere. Sometimes it can be due to an injury. Sometimes it can be due to a previous injury years ago, and there's just like a little bit of scar tissue in there. I feel like there's still a lot of debate, but for the most part, it's you have the different stages too. So there's like the freezing phase. So that's kind of when, okay, my shoulder is starting to hurt, and you're feeling it for some time, and then all of a sudden you start to realize there's a loss of range of motion. I'm not a huge, there's a time and place for injections. And there is actually a lot of really good research that shows if you can catch it like early enough and you do a cortisone shot, it can help mitigate it a lot. Just because you're calming down the inflammation there, you're not letting it get to the quote unquote frozen stage. So kind of the sooner you catch it, the better. You don't always necessarily need a cortisone shot. Sometimes rehab can be fine, and you just work on pain management and protection and education and just try to improve the range of motion. There's like some nutrition side of things and supplement side of things I'm sure that come up with that would help too. But yeah, that's kind of what I see it usually there. And I'll screen for it. Anyone that's between the ages of like 40 and 65, if they're coming in with shoulder pain, that's something that's always going to be in the back of my head. Sometimes I see it in the frozen stage where it took a long time to come in at that point. It's just kind of maintaining the motion that you have. But sometimes you do just have to let it run its clinical course, which could be 12 to 16 months sometimes. And then people feel better. I've had people do a manipulation under anesthesia as well, and then they just come every single day for 2 weeks, and they're really good about that, and then they're better. So it's one of those hard things where it's not fun, and I hope, knock on wood, that I hope I don't have to experience that, because from what I hear, it's not fun.
What is the course? Like it feels so mysterious to me. Why does it freeze and then unfreeze? Like you don't usually hear something running its course. Like I don't get a frozen knee or hip, do I? Like what is?
It's funny that you mentioned, because I actually did some research, because I was like, if it does only happen the shoulder, why? Like, why can't
Right.
it happen in the hip? Like, so there's something called a capsular pattern that you have. So for example, one of the hallmark signs is loss of external rotation, which would be like bringing your arm out like that. And then there's a capsular pattern with the shoulder. There's also a capsular pattern with the hip. It's a ball and socket joint, just like I'm like, why doesn't it happen with the hip? I don't
Right.
think I think it's we use our shoulder a lot more and we have a lot more degrees of freedom with our shoulder versus the hip. But I did actually do just a quick search just to see if there was any reported cases or anyone looking into that, and I couldn't find anything. But what's actually happening, so like the freezing stage, it's more like inflammation and guarding, because I think it's just protecting the joint, whether it's because there's estrogen fluctuations, likely it's increasing inflammatory sensitivity, maybe it's reducing the connective tissue adaptability, or there's just the cellular turnover is slow and it's not as fast. And so during this stage, stretching isn't always better. Sometimes that makes your go into more inflammatory response and makes it your brain think more guarding. So
Right.
it's like you don't really want to stretch into like pain, and more isn't always necessarily better in that stage. And then that way, I don't know. Yeah. So that would be more like the freezing stage. And then the lockdown, that's when movement is perceived as a threat and the brain reduces the motion, and you just go into this like safe protective mode. But in that beginning stage, there's still time to turn the switch, I think.
And then how does it come out of it? What's the thawing?
I, you know, I listened to a podcast. Someone was talking about it. They did their hormones. They started taking hormones and it went away and didn't run its full clinical course. I think that the inflammation eventually just kind of calms down. So the capsule just becomes more elastic. I don't think I have a good answer, to be honest, other
I'm
than,
not sure anybody has a good
yeah,
answer,
I really
honestly.
don't. I'm like
Yeah.
trying to think. I don't know. And why only 12 to 16 months, right? Like obviously you're going through hormonal changes for longer than that. So why is it all of a sudden like it's okay then? Um, there is a common theme where if you have it in one shoulder, you're a little bit more likely to have it in the other shoulder. And when it goes away, it could potentially come back. So I think it's really just comes down to estrogen, inflammation, cellular turnover. Why does it just all of a sudden kind of go away on its own?
Yeah.
I don't know.
How can we help women be, I mean, prevention is always what we're looking for, right? So let's cover some basics to help women not have to see you. Like,
I think the first thing would be mobility. I think that that's something, and I'm not just talking about flexibility. So flexibility is more like I'm stretching and I bring myself into that range. That's passive. Mobility is more like being able to move into your range and being able to control it. I think so focusing on mobility, and then also not feeling like you have to kill yourself in the gym every day. I'm really guilty of that. But I'm also 30 right now. But I have to remind myself that when I'm a little older. But I think that women don't realize that they might need a little bit more of a deload when it comes to their strength training, and they don't necessarily need to push themselves as hard as they did when they were in their 20s and their 30s. Just from a hormonal standpoint, a little bit less recovery. There might be more stress in life, whether it be your kids are getting older, maybe you have parents that you have to take care, like you go from being switching roles. So there's a lot of other things that go into play. So I would say working on mobility, not feeling like you have to kill yourself in the gym every day, focusing on just decreasing stress and focusing on sleep and doing what you can there, and then also like in the nutrition side of things. Um,
Is there a mobility practice that you like?
I do like the Starrett's
Yeah.
mobility. Yep.
The Ready
And I
State?
know Carla does too. I really
Yep.
like theirs. I started taking an online course, functional movement patterns, which is super cool too. And they do a lot of mobility stuff and full body stuff and looking at joints moving together rather than just like separate. So doing more like functional movements. I do like that. I think it's also kind of if I were to give someone homework from a mobility standpoint, I have to meet the person and see what they're going to actually continue to do on their own. It has to be something that they like to do too. So a patient preference you have to take into consideration as well when it comes to the specific type of mobility.
Yeah, I personally have taken a liking to cars, like the controlled
Yes,
articular. Yeah.
FRC training, yeah. And that's cars. How about pails and rails?
What are
Have you
pails and rails?
Pails and rails? They're another type of like FRC. So it's progressive angular isometric loading and regressive angular isometric loading. So it's like a way where you try and almost like a PNF pattern. Do you know what PNF is?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so
But can you explain it for the
yes,
audience?
peripheral
Yeah.
neuromuscular facilitation, where there's different ways where let's say you contract a muscle for 10 seconds and then you relax it. You can often sometimes get deeper into that stretch. And it's not necessarily the muscle length changing, it's more your nervous system output to that muscle that's actually allowing that lengthening to happen. So that's like the PNF. So pails and rails is kind of I feel like it's kind of similar to that, where you're pressing in and then you're kind of trying to you're progressively trying to press into, let's say if I wanted to improve my dorsiflexion, I am going into max dorsiflexion. I'm bending my ankle as much as I can. I'm pressing into the ground as hard as I can. And then I'm trying to lift my toes up. So I'm trying to actively get more range of motion rather than pushing myself into more.
Oh,
So
right.
it's like kind of another FRC principle that the cars are.
Yep.
And I've not taken a course on that. That's kind of more self-taught and learned from like mentors that I've had. But I would like to eventually take a course on that.
And you've mentioned nutrition quite a few times. So what are your top principles there?
Obviously, I have to keep it in my scope of practice.
Right.
So protein.
Yep.
And not just women, men. I've like worked with plenty of men where they're like, I'm like, what do you have for breakfast? Bowl of cereal. And what'd you have for lunch? They didn't have lunch. And then dinner, they have like, chicken, rice, and vegetables, whatever it might be. And I'm like, oh my gosh, it's not enough. So I have the protein talk a lot. And then I think creatine is obviously super important if someone can handle it from a GI standpoint. I know there's, for me personally, like I have to sometimes break it up throughout the day. Sometimes I can't do all 5 grams all at once. And I know there's like different loading phases. So, I talk about that and see if they're looking into that. But, and then also just eating enough calories. Sometimes people aren't eating enough and then their cells can't get the energy that they need to. And sometimes it's as simple as that and why they're not recovering well. So I wouldn't say I go into depth about you should eat this food, this food, this food, this food. It's more general guidelines and looking at it from like a whole and just making sure from like a macro standpoint that they're somewhat close. And then if they do want more detailed, then I usually just refer out for that.
So you mentioned the breaking up the creatine, and that's interesting to me because I do hear some women in the group. I take 5 grams and I've never noticed anything, but I 100% hear people saying, does it upset anyone else's GI tract? So you just break it up through the day?
Yeah, sometimes I'll do like a half a scoop in the morning and then a half a scoop at night. And that way I'm still getting my 5 in, but I just don't have it all at once. Although I will say recently, and when I say recently, I mean like last week or two, I feel like I am I've tried the 5 in the morning and I've been okay. I think it just took my body some time to do it. I used to take creatine and then I stopped for a while and then I just recently started again. And so I just kind of had to rework it back in.
And what do you think specifically for this audience it's beneficial for?
Like creatine wise or nutrition wise? I would say at least 5. I would say at least 5. I know I was listening to a podcast.
No. I meant like where, I mean, when you're recommending creatine to them, what what benefits are you telling them
Oh,
that
I
they'll,
see.
yeah.
I think just more like maintaining like muscle mass. I know there's a lot of good research on it for like brain health too,
Mm-hmm.
and preventing or delaying the onset of Alzheimer's and dementia. But I would say I tell them more from maintaining muscle mass and building muscle mass, as muscle we know is probably the organ of longevity, and the
Yeah.
better muscle mass you have as you age, the less likely you are to the osteoporosis, have a fall. You continue to have good power so you can catch yourself if you fall, walk long, get up and down off the floor with your grandkids. Muscle is what you want to maintain the longest.
Do you have thoughts on collagen?
Yeah, I I do. I think collagen's good. I know there's so many different brands out there, and you can sometimes get paralysis of analysis with like hearing all the different things that you should take and what you should do. I tend to cycle collagen in. So I would say that's not something I necessarily take all day, or not, well, I shouldn't say all day. It's
Right.
not something I necessarily take every day, all year long. It might be something where I'm like, maybe my knee is starting to get a little like achy and I'm like, okay, I should probably bring the collagen back in. And I tend to mix collagen in actually with my yogurt.
Hmm.
So one of my like favorite like breakfasts is I'll just get some yogurt and I'll sometimes put like a scoop of protein powder and a scoop of collagen powder. So I get like plain unsweetened yogurt, and then that's kind of my sweetener, and I mix that in, and that's a good way for me to get it. Sometimes protein shake in the morning for whatever, it just doesn't sound great, or that's just a good way for me to get my collagen in too.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I use it. I think it works. I think it
Yeah,
helps with
I know plenty of people that are like, if I don't take it, my joints will hurt.
yeah. No, I use it. I definitely use it for that.
It's collagen, creatine, protein. Another thing I like to tell people a lot is tart cherry juice from like
Hmm.
a natural anti-inflammatory standpoint, especially not necessarily all the time, but if they're going through like a kind of acute injury or they're about to have surgery.
Hmm.
I talk a lot. I think that's something that doesn't get talked about is what to do and eat before and after surgery to help your body be successful with the type of surgery. And so tart cherry juice seems to be one of my like kind of go-tos as well.
For the anti-inflammatory
Yeah,
properties.
that, and it helps people sleep at night. Um, I don't know. We
We
were
use
told to take it in college. We drank it for the 2 or 3 weeks leading up to Big Tens and NCAAs, and I drank it before like a week or two before a big competition now.
well, you see people. I don't know if you know watch cycling at all, but at the end of any big cycling stage, they hand them immediately a thing of
Tart cherry juice.
tart charges. Hmm.
Yeah.
For that
Yeah.
same reason, sort of like bring down the inflammation and bring down the system, and hopefully help them sleep.
Yep.
So they, yeah.
Yep.
Are there any other? Because certainly many people in this audience do get surgeries. Are there any other thoughts you have that you could share, generally speaking? There.
Yeah, I mean, so I'll say, I guess it kind of depends. Like, is it a bone surgery? Is it like a ligament? If there's a bone surgery, maybe I'll make sure they're having enough like vitamin D and calcium just to help with bone health. If it tends to be more like ligament or tendon, maybe that's usually when I say more like the collagen, making sure enough protein, creatine, just to keep the muscles strong. If people have access to like red light, I think red light's great just to help with like a cellular repair process. So those are just added things. I think the best thing that you can do is no alcohol.
Hmm.
Like don't eat oily, greasy foods. Don't eat bad foods. You know, give your like if you don't want to put bad oil in your car, you want to put good oil in your car. You want to give yourself and set your body up. And that's not just like I try and tell people do that at least a week or two before. Like make sure your body's set for success.
So when you say that, do you just mean like fried foods?
Yeah, fried foods.
Yeah,
Yeah,
things that are inflammatory.
yeah. So when I did my residency, I was in an outpatient ortho setting and I saw a lot of total hips and total knees.
Hmm.
And I mean, it would be like 3, 4 months after surgery and their knee would still be super inflamed. And they're like, I don't get it. I'm still coming to PT. And I'm like, what are you eating? McDonald's, breakfast, lunch, and dinner. It's just easy, you know? I had surgery. I'm like, you had surgery 4 months ago. You can,
Right.
let's like, you, anyway.
Yes. Yes. I understand what you're saying, and I I imagine you feel the same way sort of about a lot of simple sugars or simple carbohydrates for the same,
Definitely.
yeah, for the same inflammatory
Yeah.
purposes.
Yeah, just education on that as the person's willing to. I mean, sometimes you have to I can kind of tell when someone maybe doesn't want to listen to it or doesn't want to hear it. So, but for the most part, I feel like I attract clients that because I get referrals from word of mouth, so they all are kind of similar in the way, and they come to me and they ask specifically like, what did you tell my friend? What did you tell Carla? Like, I need to know what you told Carla because she's doing so good. Now I need to do good.
Right.
So usually everyone's on a similar mindset.
So then help me a little bit with gauging pain, for lack of a better way of putting this. Because a lot of times, you start out and you feel pretty good and maybe there's a niggle, but if you keep going, the niggle goes away and that seems to be fine. But are there things that people should be, what constitutes a flag, I guess, is what I'm looking for. What your advice is for people when they should be like, okay, that's not just a niggle. Maybe it's something you want to pay attention to more carefully, or
Yeah,
just general advice around that.
pain is like information. It's a signal. It's not always damage report. Pain doesn't
Right.
always necessarily mean damage. Pain just might mean sensitivity can be higher. Maybe tissue healing might be slower. You're recovering slower, but doesn't automatically mean injury. And I think that's something sometimes I have to educate on too. Like when I ask people, describe the pain, they're like, it's just like achy. And I'm like, okay, so is there sharp pain? So sometimes it's trying to decipher with people the type of pain that they're having, because there are good types of pain and there are bad types of pain. So good pain might be um like a little mild ache or muscle burn when you're working out and a little bit
Right.
of soreness after you work out. Like that's not bad. That's not bad pain.
Right.
A little bit of discomfort maybe when you're stretching at end range or you're doing some mobility work where you're working on some myofascial or soft tissue restrictions. And pain that's predictable through movement. Maybe it improves, like as you said, as you warm up. Usually settles within 24 or 48 hours and doesn't really change how you move afterward. Like that's all okay. Bad pain is more like that sharp stabbing, catching. Maybe you're walking differently because the pain hurts. It worsens during activity, persists like many days in a row. Maybe if there's an acute injury, obviously you might have some swelling or you might have night pain that keeps you up while you're sleeping, loss of range of motion, strength, those kind of things. Those are more like the bad pain. So I would say more like that 24-hour rule. So make sure, like, is your pain the same or better the next day? Then you're probably okay. If it's worse, then maybe you overdid it and maybe you loaded up too much. I also use a number scale sometimes. So pain up to a 2 or a 3 out of 10, it's acceptable,
Yeah.
especially with like tendon remodeling. Like you do have to have a little bit of pain when you do tendon remodeling to actually make a meaningful change in the collagen in the tendon, to help with the cellular repair. So again, I have to sometimes gauge it based on the person. Some people's talk, but for the most part, like 2 to 3 out of 10 is okay pain, maybe 4 for tendons. But pain shouldn't spike suddenly. It should, and it should turn to baseline pretty quickly as soon as you're done doing the thing that's aggravating it. Rehab isn't always pain-free, but it shouldn't be like always painful and pain dominant. And then also, I'll say this, hormonal shifts can sometimes increase pain sensitivity.
Right.
And that's not just perimenopause, menopause. That could be, like, I work with a bunch of high school girls, and when they're on
Oh,
their
yeah.
period, different times
Yeah.
of their cycle, like they might feel things more. So
That's real. Mm-hmm.
that's, it doesn't just portray to that, but sometimes shifts in your hormones can increase pain sensitivity too. So knowing that and use that as a guide too. If you're in pain for a couple of days, is it the time of your month? Is it the, time of your cycle? I know you're often it's always like push through pain or stop everything. The goal isn't always zero pain, but it should be safe and steady, and it should be good progress.
So then finally, I'm curious if you have recovery practices or tools that you like. We did talk about the tart cherry juice, but
Yeah.
there's so many things out there. There's the Theraguns and there's plunges and but you mentioned red light and there's sauna. Like what do you think is good practice for recovery?
Yeah, I think That's a good question. And I'm not going to lie, I'm not always the best. But
It's
for
good to be honest.
example, like swimming to me is almost my recovery now. So
Hmm.
I tend to do more high intensity when it comes to CrossFit and like running, maybe some of my paddling, but swimming tends to be a little bit more low intensity. So recovery doesn't always necessarily mean like passive stuff. It could be active stuff too, like going for an easy walk, just getting some blood flow. So I would say I'm pretty good at doing that for recovery. Usually I'm a little bit better when I know I have like a big race or a big competition coming up. I like plunge and sauna. I like hot and cold. I don't, go into a plunge same day I do strength training. I don't think that's beneficial. I try and do both plunge and sauna on and off day. I don't really have super easy access to it. I have to, go somewhere
Yeah.
to do it. But when I can, I like to do that. I do like the red light. I have a red light that's going to be moving into my clinic here soon. So that will be nice. I have that now.
What does
I
the
would
red light do for
honestly
you?
sleep. I would just make sure I have enough sleep. I think
Oh,
sleep is one of the biggest things.
I
That's
agree
really
with that.
the best recovery that you can do, and that's free. Doesn't always have to be expensive. It doesn't always have to cost a lot of money. The recovery can be as simple as sleep.
I am curious about the red light. What is that doing for you?
Yes. So red light helps with like mitochondrial health. So I took a course recently. It was called Orthobiological Hacker course. It was super cool, super interesting. It talked all about how to use photobiomodulation, which is red light kind of falls underneath that, shock wave, those kind of
Mm.
things to help with people after stem cell or PRP injections to help actually with the tissue remodeling process and people that don't want to go the surgical route. I tend to see more of that. So basically, it helps to reduce pain sensitivity, the red light. It helps to improve circulation and it helps to support tissue healing. Um, it helps with mitochondrial health and the electron transport chain in regards to getting blood flow moving. You can add in things, not to go down a rabbit hole, but you can add in things like NAD to help with that too. What's the other one? CoQ10 is another good one. Those two, along with like the red light, really help a lot with the electron transport chain. But it's a supportive tool. It's not a standalone treatment. And it's usually paired best with like movement and like that kind of recovery. It can be helpful for injuries, but I don't think it should be the only thing that you do. But basically, it just helps with reducing pain sensitivity, circulation, mitochondrial health, and yeah.
All right. Is there anything that we haven't covered that you wanted to make sure that we covered about any of these topics?
Hmm. No, I could probably talk forever. And I could probably go down a rabbit hole, but I think the one thing is I'm still learning. I'm still learning. So I graduated PT school 2021 and it's 2026. So I'm almost 5 years out and I'm constantly learning. And I think that being on this podcast also helped me. Like I listened to a couple of your previous podcasts and I did a little bit of like research on my own and I'm always constantly learning. And I think that, I don't know everything and I'm excited to continue to learn more. That's really it. And so hopefully I said something today to someone that they haven't heard before and they're like, wow, that was super cool because I love it when I listen to a podcast and I'm like, wow, that was cool. I've never learned that before. So I hope I can do that for someone today.
Yeah, I think just understanding because so often we do when we get an injury, we do just get such an isolated treatment for that injury. And what I've heard from you is just looking at like a whole person, not just movement, but just systemically, what are you doing? What are you eating? All of the things really do make a difference.
It does 100%. And I wish in a traditional PT realm like we had the time to do that, but we don't. And sometimes, and this is not to like bash insurance, but insurance dictates it.
Yeah.
Like but I I had someone that had a total knee replacement and insurance allowed them to have 5 visits. 5 visits. Like what am I I did the best I could in 5 visits. And I don't know. So it's nice to be able to treat someone the way you want to treat them and not be limited with what you can and cannot do.
Yeah. 100%. Well, thank you for the work you do. Thank you for taking care of Carla for us.
Yeah,
We
absolutely.
appreciate.
Thank you,
I'm sure.
Carla, for recommending me. This is super fun. I enjoyed it.
All right. Well, take care, and I'm sure we'll be back in touch down the line. As
Sounds good.
yeah. All right, Carla, welcome back to
Thank
Play
you.
Not Pause. You're a regular now. Um, this is interesting because I talked to your performance PT, Casey, and then I thought I want to get like your perspective of also your experience because this actually all started with you. This started with the blog that you wrote about your experience with performance physical therapy, and I thought that's a really interesting idea. So I talked to her, and then I was like, "Oh, I want to talk to Carla again." So thanks for humoring me and coming back on.
Oh, anytime. I'm such a believer after my experience with Casey. It's been amazing. It really is. It's changed my perspective on a lot of things.
Oh, interesting. Okay, so let's start at the beginning. You are a physician and you understand physiology and you're all the things. You're a coach. And what were you experiencing when that sent you on this journey to Casey?
Well, the first injury was an overuse injury from playing tennis.
Okay.
It was kind of like tennis elbow, but not tennis elbow because the pain was in my forearm. And this was not this past December, but the December before.
Okay.
And I was playing a lot of tennis. I had just gotten back into it. I had just moved to Florida, joined a new tennis club, and, all guns blazing. I'm working on my serve. And I was just having pain in my forearm. And I was getting ready to go back up north for the month of December because my son was on college break. And I'm like, all right, I won't be playing tennis for a month. I'll rest it. Everything will be fine. No problem. Well, I go home and it got worse. And it was affecting CrossFit.
Mm.
I couldn't, I was having a hard time pulling things. I would have a hard time. I'm not sure if most of your audience knows what a dumbbell snatch is, but what a dumbbell snatch is when you have a dumbbell on the floor and you bend over kind of like a deadlift, and then you pull the dumbbell up close to your body, drop under it, and turn it up so that you're holding it over your head. So
Yep.
that pulling to get the dumbbell up to chest level and then turn it over was excruciating. Just picking that same dumbbell up and putting it on the rack. I couldn't do it with one hand. Even with 15 pounds, I'd have to pick it up with two hands.
Wow.
Jump roping, double unders, that's very wrist driven. That was painful. Anything pulling from the floor with barbell was painful. So I'm like, what the hell happened? It wasn't a specific moment on the tennis court that this happened. And I thought, well, I'm resting it. It'll get better. And it got worse. I didn't know what to do with this. And it was lasting a long time. So the first thing I did was I contacted Juliet Starrett,
Mm.
Kelly Starrett and Juliet. They were doing performance PT before it was even called performance PT.
The Ready
And
State. They've
the
been
Ready
around
State,
forever.
they
Hmm.
have. And so, I've gotten to know them, and they gave me access to their tennis elbow protocol, and I used that, and it helped. But it didn't quite make it so that I could function again. I certainly couldn't play tennis. I could not swing a racket with the pain. And then I had my body worker, my massage therapist, who's also a body worker. I had her working on it, and she's like, "You got these trigger points that they're just knotted up." She said, "I can't get at them. You may want to see someone who can do some dry needling on your forearm." She said, "Go," and she gave me Casey's name. So I'm like, okay, I'll give this a try. So I went to Casey. That was the first time I met her. And she did an assessment evaluation. She could see what movements hurt, what movements didn't, and what I could and couldn't do. And she thought that dry needling was a good idea. And what she thought was happening, the way she explained it to me, was that the overuse injury from the tennis created this healing situation. When the muscle fibers healed, they kind of healed like they were tangled up.
Mm.
So instead of the fibers sliding on each other and gliding on each other smoothly, it's kind of like when you've got knots in your hair and you try to put a comb through it. It's just things snag and nothing is gliding or sliding smoothly. And it almost felt like that too, because different movements, I'd feel things catching. I'd feel things pulling. So I could believe it because what she was explaining was like, well, yeah, it kind of does feel like things is tangled up in there. So then we did the needling. That was that was something. It worked, but it was painful. But you know what? Casey was just so good. She would put the needles in there, and putting the needles in there wasn't the worst of it. It was when we really had to up the voltage. She'd start the voltage out, and it would be low, and it's fine. And it's these little pulses, and it was okay. But you really kind of have to get to a threshold for it to work. And so I would kind of just deal with it. And I did it three separate sessions. I did all of the exercises that she gave me. She gave me isometric, she gave me dynamic stuff, and I did them. I did them 4 or 5 times a week. Whenever I was at the gym, I made the time to do them. And within a matter of 2 to 3 months, the injury was gone. Like gone. Like today, it's like it never even happened.
So you weren't doing any eccentric loading?
I was doing all kinds of stuff.
Okay.
I was doing eccentric stuff. I was doing concentric stuff. I was doing isometric stuff. I probably had a total of maybe 10, 12 different exercises that she
Wow.
gave me along the way. She didn't give me 10 or 12 at once. Like it started out with a lot of isometric stuff. And then she did another assessment. Like I said, she needled me 3 times. So she kind of assessed things, how they were going each time she needled me. And in the last month or so of the whole treatment, we moved away from the isometric stuff and then started doing more concentric, eccentric types of movements, more dynamic movement. And that, along with the third dry needling, it sent me over the hump, and it's been fine. It's been over a year now, and that injury is way in the rearview mirror.
Did it resolve gradually, or did it feel like you just woke up and
It
you
was
were...
gradual. It was gradual over that 3-month period.
And did you ever doubt that it was going to work?
Yeah, I mean, in the beginning, I was trying everything, before I met Casey. And I'm like, this just isn't going away. This is taking a long time. The whole month of December while I was up in Rhode Island, and then January, February before I even met Casey, it was a road before I even met her. And then once I started working with her, it was another 2 to 3 months. And it was after I had the dry needling that I really started to see the difference, where I was making progress.
Gotcha.
Whereas I'd try other stuff and it would feel good for a couple days, but then it would go back to the way it was.
Yeah.
But what she was doing, what the exercises she gave me and the needling she was doing, it was sustainable progress to the point that it resolved.
And then she had told me that when she was doing her original assessment that you were just in there for your forearm issues, but she was seeing other stuff going on too, as far as your movement patterns and your hip and your back, and you were like, I don't want to talk about that. I want to take care of my arm. Like, are you now dealing with some of your other issues?
Yeah, well, it's funny. I was up in Rhode Island in December, came back, worked with her through the spring, and then I was back up in Rhode Island for the summer, that same summer, so May through the end of August. And during that time, I reached out to her because I was having some shoulder and some hip issues. I was feeling very inflammatory up there. I had a body worker actually tell me that she said everybody's feeling inflammatory. There was smoke from the fires in Canada that were blowing into the Northeast. And this was just her opinion. She thought that a lot of people were experiencing inflation because of this.
It was a lot of smoke. I was hitting down Pennsylvania even.
Yeah.
Here.
I mean, I could see it on the horizon, because I live on the ocean up in Rhode Island, and you could just see it. And just breathing that stuff in every day. So I was feeling it in my shoulders. I was feeling it in my hips. And virtually, she was able to demonstrate and give me some exercises to start working on that. Then I came back in the fall, and now we're over the winter, and I started having shoulder problems. Now, I had had shoulder problems back in 2020, some pretty bad ones, like to the point where I couldn't even do an overhead squat with a PVC pipe. it was bad. I couldn't do push-ups, and that's one of the things that I tend to do well with. And I was like incapacitated. This was in 2020. And so I was on this very long journey to rehab my shoulder then. And I did. And I was able to rehab it again. Kelly and Juliet Starrett, all the protocols that they have, I was able to rehab it. And I also have a good coach. And so what I was doing back in 2020 was I was using crossover symmetry. That is, it's a system. It's a resistance band system that it's like a household name in the CrossFit world. And it really helps to strengthen the supporting muscles and muscle systems around your shoulder. So I was doing this, and I was doing this regularly. I had a setup in my house, and my shoulders completely healed, and they were stronger than ever. Well, then I sold my house, and then I moved down to Florida, and the gym that I'm here, the box that I'm here, that I go to here, doesn't have that crossover symmetry setup. So it just fell by the wayside for a whole year. And then I was bench pressing. Now, fast forward back to where we are now. I'm bench pressing, actually had hit an all-time personal record the week before, and I was benching heavy again, and I went to go put the weight back on the rack. It wasn't even during the movement. I was putting the weight back on the rack, and I tweaked something in the back of my left shoulder, and that was it. And what then I realized was that abandoning the crossover symmetry for the last year created these weaknesses and these movement patterns that created the problem back in 2020. So, I was feeling like, hey, I'm in the best shape that I've been in. My shoulders, I can do more push-ups than I could before. I'm completely rehabilitated. I don't need to do this anymore. Well, that was the biggest lesson learned, is that this stuff needs to be done for maintenance. So now I'm working with Casey again, and we're working on rehabbing my shoulders all over again. And when she was evaluating me for that, she noticed what was going on in my hips and my lower back. And I was having lower back pain. I was just kind of just chalking it up to, okay, just everything hurts right now. And there were certainly movement patterns that Casey felt were tied together, that the hip stuff was impacting the shoulder stuff. And a lot of that had to do with thoracic mobility, because you're feeling pain in the hips, it makes you not move so much, you're stiff, and then you're trying to load your shoulders on, less mobility in your thoracic area. And on top of that, my scapular complexes have gotten weak because I ignored them for a year. Right. So here we are again. And we're rehabbing, and she gave me a bunch of exercises about a month ago, and I've been doing them, and it's slowly but surely, it's getting better. And tomorrow, actually, I am going for some shockwave therapy on my shoulder, because she thinks the same thing is happening in the shoulder that happened with the forearm, that things have healed up tangled. Now, it's funny because like when I have my hands out like a T, right, and I do internal and external rotation, there's something catching in that left shoulder. I can feel it clicking. And so she thinks things are catching, things have healed in a disjointed sort of way. And she feels the shockwave therapy will kind of break that up, kind of like the needling did for my forearm. Yep. And it will allow the fibers to slide on themselves again. And in the meantime, I'm trying to rebuild back that whole muscle system that supports my shoulders.
Well, that's really interesting. Like, that's all interesting because, what you're describing is what so many active women experience, right? Like something goes awry, and then it feels like there's just this chain reaction of things that go awry, and you can't quite tease what's happening with what. And the idea that things can resolve in a way that is still not functional, I think is really interesting too. And that's what I'm hearing, that has been happening. How has that changed how you think about all of it, like your own mobility and your training and how to manage all of because you're very active, you do CrossFit and you're running and doing all this stuff. How has this sort of changed your thinking about all of this?
I think, as we get older, and this is true of men and women, when I talk to high-level CrossFit male athletes, they all tell you the same thing, that at around 32 is when they really start to feel it when it comes to recovery, that they're noticing that it takes longer and that they have to pay more attention to it. And they do. And they set aside the time and, it just becomes part of their training. But somehow, I don't know if it's a male-female thing or what it is. Maybe as females, we overthink it, intellectually. And I have taken that approach to where I am in this phase of life. So, I'm 55 years old. I'm about 3 or 4 years into menopause, and we know that that comes with certain physical changes. And rather than overthinking it and saying, okay, it's the beginning of the end and whatever, it's just like, okay, I just now have to pay more attention to these things and integrate new things into my training. I get to the gym about 15 minutes earlier than I did before so that I have time to do my physical therapy. And it's now just become habit. I bring my crossover symmetry system with me because they don't have one there. I just hook it up and I just do it. And there's no more judgment associated with it. It's just, this is what I need to do. If I want to keep moving, if I want to stay strong, if I want to stay injury-free, this is what's necessary. And I will never neglect my scapular complex ever again. And that is the other big thing that I learned, is that physical therapy is not just for an acute injury. It is for prevention of injury. And that, I think, is the biggest light bulb that I've learned over the last, few years doing this. Since 2020, when I had the initial problems with my shoulder, is that, you can't just like say, okay, quick fix, shoulders are done, and now I don't have to maintain them. When we get into this phase of life and, we need to do more maintaining, we kind of can't get away with what we could get away with in our 20s and our 30s.
That always begs the question, is if we were getting away with it then. Like, I always wonder that.
Yeah, it's
like,
a good point.
Do you know what I'm saying? That if under the hood we weren't getting away with it and it just manifests later on.
That's very possible. When I think about the things I used to do back then, it's quite possible that those behaviors set me up for the problems that I'm having now. I've always been a very upper body dominant athlete. And God, I've done so many push-ups in my life. And it's interesting because before I started doing CrossFit, I was 45 when I started doing CrossFit, and I was doing a lot of other stuff before that. I realized I was doing push-ups incorrectly, with my elbows positioned in a position that they probably shouldn't have been in. So I learned how to do a push-up correctly when I started doing CrossFit. And that begs the question, to your point. It's like, well, what the heck was I doing to my shoulders all those years that I was doing push-ups incorrectly?
What were you doing?
It was, instead of having my elbows tucked in closer to the side of my body, they would flare out laterally a little bit
That
more.
was a thing though back
It
then.
was a thing.
It was a thing. Like all the pictures of push-ups were like arms wide, elbows out. Yeah, it was a thing. Is it supposed to like a little tighter into your body?
Yeah, and then the CrossFitters taught me how to do it. I'm like, I feel like I'm doing a tricep push-up here. I feel like I feel like a T-Rex here doing push-ups, but it was much kinder to my shoulder and a stronger way to do them. It involves your triceps a little bit more rather than putting all the load on your shoulders. So who knows, what I did to my shoulders all those years doing push-ups that way.
And what do you think is going on with your hip?
I don't know. I think it could be tied to the thoracic mobility stuff that's going on, that lack of. Been dealing with a lot of stress. I know that when I'm stressed, sometimes I find myself in my chair with my shoulders hunched up like this, and then I go to reach for something, and that puts some undue stress on my shoulder, and I just get tense. And I think sometimes I may not stretch enough, I may not loosen up enough, and I try to train when I'm still stiff. And so when you train when you're still stiff, then sometimes things get impacted. And I think my lower back was getting impacted, doing heavy deadlifts and squats when maybe I wasn't as warmed up as I should have been.
Yeah.
But now that I'm doing the physical therapy stuff, I've got stuff for my hips, I got stuff for my shoulders, depending on what the CrossFit workout is, I make sure I do them. And the lower back, I'd say, is 90% now.
Do you think the take-home message here is that everybody, if they have access, or maybe everybody should try to find access in some way to some sort of a mobility assessment, just to get a global picture of what things look like?
Oh, totally. I mean, I think like if you're going to save up your money for one thing, I would say get an assessment by a performance PT and just get their opinion on what's happening. What movement patterns are not productive.
Yeah.
And then, you could do something like if you don't have the means to have ongoing PT
Right.
sessions, because God knows they're expensive, you could sign up for the Ready State. They have really reasonable, I think their membership is something like $15 a month, and you have access to so many things. So if you have a performance PT, you do that one-time consultation, they tell you what you need to work on, then you can on your own find the Ready State or whoever and do some exercises on your own. That's what I did the first time when I hurt my shoulders in 2020. That was all me. I hadn't met with a physical therapist at that point. I had just contacted people and asked them questions. But there's so many people now doing physical therapy in the performance space that if that resource is there, it's a great thing to take advantage of.
Totally agree. Is there anything else that you thought that we should know about this before?
I mean, I think I just want to emphasize that it needs to become part of the routine, like ongoing. Once I'm done rehabbing my shoulders, I will have a maintenance routine. And it's something that needs to be as important as the workout that you're doing that day. And it's something that you can't compromise on. And yes, it takes patience. Yes, it takes time, or it might be boring
It's kind
or
of
whatever.
boring. It's kind of boring, but
But
yes.
I will tell you, after experiencing another shoulder situation that I had dug myself out of because I neglected my shoulders. It's not like I didn't do a single thing for my shoulders. I was doing CrossFit, 3 times a week, and I was doing stuff, but shoulder presses, cleans, snatches, that stuff doesn't get at the whole shoulder system and the smaller muscles of the rotator cuff and things like that. You really need to pay very specific attention to those things. So I think that's the big take home is that if you have mobility issues, get a diagnosis, figure out what's wrong, and then put together an acute phase program and then a maintenance, and then just make it part of your workout forever.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree with that. And even I would say that even if you don't have issues right now, it is enlightening to have an assessment. I've had a few, and they do show imbalances and things where, again, maybe you think you're fine and getting away, but it might prevent something down the road. I've become a big believer in that it's still like that. And it doesn't have to be like my stuff only takes 5 minutes maybe just to go through to keep my hips where they should be so I can run. But I'm very convinced that it keeps me from getting all kinds of itises and IT band flare-ups and all the things that can happen when you neglect that stuff.
For sure. Absolutely. Absolutely.
All right. Well, good luck with it. And I appreciate your time as always.
Anytime. It's always fun to be on.
Well, that is our show. Come on back next week when I have on Dimity McDowell, the co-founder of Another Mother Runner, which Feisty just acquired. They are under our umbrella now, which is awesome. They have been around a long time, and they are tremendous. And she is also the author of The 27th Mile, which explores the emotional journey of transitioning away from running, particularly when maybe that wasn't really your choice. And we just had a great conversation about athletics and identity and where life takes you that I know will hit home for many of you. So come on back for that one. And until then, as always, stay feisty. You have been listening to Hit Play Not Pause, a feisty menopause podcast for active performance-minded women. I'm your host, Celine Yeager. This show is edited and produced by the most amazing Carrie Barrett and the other talented, strong women at Feisty Media. Follow us on social media at Feisty Menopause, and please help us spread the word. Screenshot and share this episode on your social media channels with the tag @FeistyMenopause. And please subscribe, like, review, and rate this show wherever you get your podcasts. Word of mouth and good reviews make it easier for other listeners to find. Thanks for listening, and as always, stay feisty.